We'll be starting in just a moment. All right, sounds like we're going to get started. Welcome to the IETF DKIM meeting for IETF 123. So it is but Tuesday, so we will remind you still quite explicitly. These seem to get faster and faster as the week goes on. The note well, there are a bunch of policies and procedures that the IETF defines. They have to do with the Internet Standards process, the working group processes, anti-harassment procedures, code of conduct, copyrights, patents, and overall participation, privacy, including the fact that this session is being recorded. If you are not familiar with these processes and procedures, please go take a look at the documents cited on this slide. Some of them have very big implications for intellectual property that your employer might hold, and they might want to know about those things if you don't know about them already. So by participating, you are acknowledging that you are going to abide by those rules. Please do so. The other thing to keep in mind is that we do expect professional behavior, or at least civil behavior, and we do ask that, we treat everybody with respect. The chairs will control if people are being disruptive here, but if things cross over into what you might think is harassment, the IETF does have an ombuds team. Please feel free to go contact them and ask for advice if someone has crossed the line to being harassing. That's what they're there for. And if you believe someone else is being harassed, you can also approach them. They are happy to give advice, and there are lots of enforcement procedures if things get out of hand. So I already mentioned the QR code. Is it hanging from the mic? It is. So for those in the room, if you need to use the QR code to log into the room, there's a little placard on the mic. You can go scan that. Either way, if you go to the IETF agenda page for this meeting, you can log into the MeetEcho client, and we need you in there because we're going to, for speaking purposes, use the queue in the MeetEcho tool, whether you're in here or remote. And so if you want to speak, you'll just click the raise hand button and you'll be put in the queue. And we'll swap back and forth between remote and in person as they appear in the queue. Please, if you're using the full-fledged tool, mute your machine so that we don't get all sorts of funky echoes in here. And if you are remote, please, if you can, unless you're up at the mic, leave your audio and video off in the client. That'll save a little bandwidth. And if you can, use a headset because that'll stop with any echo cancellation problems that some folks seem to have. So here is our agenda. We are going to, as I said on the list, do 10 minutes of administrivia, which we are in the middle of. Then we're going to talk about the assorted attempts at headers drafts, and we listed those out there, and they are in the meeting tool on the data tracker. We'll spend, I'm thinking, about an hour on that. There's a motivations draft, which we want to see what we need to add to that, do to that, remove from that to get things moving along. We'll spend some time there. We'll talk about other drafts that are currently published, and then any other business that people want to engage in. Does anybody have any additions, changes to the agenda that they would like to bash on here? Go ahead and raise your hand in the queue if you're remote. We will assume that this is good enough for purposes. All right. So for the administrivia stuff, we already noted the note well. We already bashed the agenda. Mauro has volunteered, if for some values of the word volunteered, to take down action items and rough consensus inside the room. If anyone else can join him in the note tool, I pasted the link into the chat. Please do join him, even if you can't take notes fully. It would be nice if you notice that he didn't quite get something down properly, or you have something you think to add. Please do that. And there are a couple of other useful URLs on the slide so that you can go find what we're talking about. Okay, so John is already in the tool, and
the notes become the minutes. So if you want to make sure something gets in there, please help us out here.
All right. Given administrivia done, it is time to discuss some drafts. Murray and I sort of envision this as an open discussion, because right now we do not have anything beyond the motivation document adopted by the working group to work on. That is a funky state to be in. So there are 3 drafts that have made attempts to sort of do the overall, I shouldn't say overall, the main piece of what the charter says we should be working on. There's draft Crocker, DKIM decor. There is draft Gondwana, DKIM header, which came out of when we did the split of the input document. And then there's the draft Nermpeso, I always get his Nermpeso, DKIM access control diff changes, which more or less covers similar parts of the area. We want to get an idea of what can be adopted by this working group as a main working group item. When we have this discussion, please, I like the term the steel man argument. This is the opposite of the straw man argument. If you're going to discuss one of the drafts and you want to say it needs some changes before it's adoptable, please put it in its best light. Fine for you to say, I prefer one of the others, but if we had to do this document, here's the things I think it still needs. These things are just fine. But bashing away and looking for all the nits that it currently has is not useful. What we want is what would make this adoptable? What needs to be added? What should be removed? And possible answers might include, we should incorporate one of these other drafts that's out there in the data tracker because that's needed. Whatever you think needs to move along. We are looking for adoptability, not perfect, not wonderful, not close to done, just a reasonable starting point. If the group comes up with multiple choices where all of the 3 are adoptable, we'll have a discussion about how to flip the coin or whatever we choose to do to pick one as a starting point. All right. So it is your turn now to get in the queue. Oh, I was supposed to ask. We can even use the hand raising tool if you want. How many people have read the document? Have you read the documents?
All of them.
Yes, all three. Half of the available participants have said that half of them have read the documents. Still half of us have read the documents. Now that's exactly half of the participants. So, reminder for the next meeting, folks, be it interim or in person, read the documents ahead of time, please. If you haven't read the documents, I don't expect you to be a large part of the conversation. I expect people who have read the documents to be giving input on what's needed to get them adopted. Seems like no one else wants to participate. Okay. So the mic is open. Please come up and give us an idea of what your preference is. Go ahead and put yourself in the queue. Go ahead, Richard, you can start.
Okay, I have read all the documents. I also read the documents in earlier versions. And one of the things that struck me when I was reading refreshing my memory of the documents an hour or two ago was the way in which the Crocker draft and the Stefan draft are iterating towards bronze draft, in that they keep picking up ideas from bronze draft and putting them in, perhaps not in fully understanding why the features are in bronze draft, but they're kind of iterating towards bronze draft, and that's why I would like to see us adopt bronze draft, because it has all the things which I think we need in there. Yeah, in particular, I am very keen on trying to tidy up some of the practical issues which we have with DKIM and approaches which start by saying, let's keep the existing DKIM 1 header and add things to it, I think are flawed, because they don't actually fix the practical problems we have with dealing with things like oversigning, with not signing a suitable set of headers because of stupidity or ignorance or whatever. I think that an important aim of what we're trying to do is to improve bounce handling so that we can accept mail, change our mind 10 minutes later, and send it, and then create an effectively asynchronous bounce, and have that bounce go back to the correct place and not go back to some random stranger as backscatter. And I'm also keen to institutionalize the way in which we provide feedback to about delivery to senders, particularly what we call ESPs, people who handle mail on behalf of a brand and send that mail, because it's the ESP who wants to deal with the feedback, and we need a practical way of flagging that feedback is required, and that is something which has not yet iterated into the other two drafts, but is covered in bronze draft. I've probably got some other things as well, but I'll let some other people contribute to the conversation.
Thank you, Dave. You are up next.
Oh, goody. So first of all, checking audio, volume okay?
Just fine.
Great. So the challenge in this work, and I apologize I didn't send this earlier, but last night I finally put together a table of the various functional goals that this effort seems to be embracing from the version 3 of the so-called motivation document, which now has a different title. There are 9 functions that I identified. I think that's correct. And then I added one at the beginning of the table, which is the charter's desire for compatibility with the installed base. And I think that something that has consistently not been understood is the benefits of doing divide and conquer in approaching this. First, because it creates better focus and clarity in each piece of work. And second, because it allows opportunities for compatibility that the current work currently does not have. And having discussion along those lines, which leads to one draft adopting something from another, is a good indication of the dialogue that can happen, rather than a model of just rejecting out of hand alternative choices. The decor spec was done to focus on one very specific aspect of the 9 different goals that the motivation document has been addressing. And so it's not trying to encompass the whole range, it's trying to encompass one specific function. And it's trying to do that in a way, or it does that in a way, which is compatible with the installed base of DKIM. There is, unfortunately, let's see, no, I'm supposed to say this positively. There is a benefit to maintaining compatibility with an installed base that needs more appreciation than it has been getting in this work. The tendency to make decisions that create incompatibility has been at the core of the work from before it's being brought here, and has not been getting any explicit attention in spite of the very explicit listing in the charter. I would equally recommend that it is way premature for pursuing the details of the header spec, not because I think there is anything inherently wrong with it, but merely because it is too soon to lock down those kinds of details. The table that I sent around last night, and I'll apologize only this one more time for sending it this late in the game, tries to distinguish between what the problem is versus what the approach to solving it is versus what the details of trying to solve it are. And I would aggressively encourage people to comment on each of those aspects of what's in the table. I have no belief that I got everything exactly right, and lots of belief that I got lots of it not right. It's meant for discussion. It's meant for focused discussion. No, I won't apologize the last time. And I'm going to stop there because I think that's the level of discussion we ought to have.
Thanks. Alan, you're up. And for those folks participating, don't take yourself out of the queue until you're completely done. And the chairs can always do that because it leaves your name at the top of the list and people can identify who you are when you're speaking. Just a handy thing for the folks who are local and remote to see. So Alan, go ahead.
Okay. So yeah, I spent some time over the weekend reading through the 3 docs. You know, similar to Richard, I think the conclusion I came to was that we're all moving in the right, or in a very similar direction. So that's very, very promising that like we're not doing something that is unreasonable. As far as adoptability, I have a slight preference toward bronze document, merely because that's kind of my line of thinking about how we're going to end up approaching this. That being said, all 3 documents, I think, have things that I would like to see in them. So starting with bronze, the diff support, and there's a separate document for that. The diff support is very critical to making that work. If we don't have that specified, then this thing kind of falls apart, I think. And so that's one shortcoming of that draft. Whereas Stefan's draft has the diff support, and the DCore draft does not. But intentionally does not actually even address that as a feature. So there's some aspect of that where I think a lot of some of these drafts could use some work to add that. Other drafts, like Stefan's draft, have it, but I'm not really comfortable as that being the best option for adoptability if we're picking one of the 3. Just because I found it to be quite difficult to follow beyond the diff stuff.
Question for you, Alan. You
Yep.
mentioned the diff functionality. Do you think that needs to be folded into one of the drafts before we adopt? Like, do you want it to be? Do you want those 2 things to either be in one document, or that we should adopt both of those documents to get going, or like if we did DCore and the diff document, or one of those solutions? What are you looking for, I guess, is my question.
Folding them in folding in the diff support might be better. I don't know that it's required for adoptability. I think it would be as is on the slides here, a reasonable starting point is a document which doesn't have diffs, but with the intention that we're going to build that in at some point.
Got it. Thanks.
I think that's all I have to say at this point.
All right. Wei, you are up to bat.
Yeah, thanks. So I'm largely going to probably be very similar to Alan's comments. Basically, I think, I agree with Richard that there is, and glad that there is a gradual convergence of the concepts, that forwarding matters, that we need some sort of notion of a forwarder's instance number, and that some of these concepts around what's been described before as algebra to help reverse some of the transforms that the forwarders do are good ideas, and that folks are gradually adopting all of them. I agree also with the prior comment that basically, the headers document has a lot more of the things that would be helpful, where I think these things ought to go to. I did want to push back on one of the notions that was previously said by Dave, which is basically we need to maintain compatibility with the current form of DKIM. Not so much because, we have to adopt wholesale all these different other, definitions of tags and values. And no, it's not that. It's rather that there is an established base. I agree with him on that. But the established base also has a specific way of interpreting those results. And while we're trying to bring up the new thing, there is a very large risk of disrupting the old thing, and then hence the deliverability of those messages. While we're bringing up the new thing, I think it is better to interpret it separately as something like authentication results that are in experimental state. So yes, we should adopt a lot of the ideas from the current DKIM RFC. And in fact, I think this is largely true, we can adopt a lot of the definitions from the DNS, from the tags and values and the algorithms, but we should use a different header. And that will prevent that mixing of authentication results that will affect interoperability. The one other comment, I guess, I also had a hard time trying to understand Stefan's document. I mean, maybe I didn't read it long enough or hard enough, but I kind of got stuck in a bunch of places. So take it for what you will. And that's my comments. Thanks.
Thanks, Bron. Oh, Bron is here in the room. He gets to go up to the
I'm
microphone.
here in the room. I guess there's a few different areas here to talk about. So starting with the question of the different drafts, I wouldn't say my draft is complete. I don't think it needs to be a single draft. Splitting it apart is fine. I think there are real pros and cons of having a bunch of separate documents that you need to read in order to implement something completely versus having a single document. So I think that's something to discuss. I think it is very important that we have a complete thing and not a partial thing. And the reason for that is that you need to be able to exclude messages. You need to be able to exclude something that comes from a bad actor. And the problem we have at the moment is that you can't exclude a message that comes from a bad actor because you don't know whether the sender intended to BCC you or whether a bad actor is replaying it to you. And I want to be careful that in all the possible mail flows, that the complete solution, as I believe it is, allows you to exclude things that we don't wind up in a situation where we have, if they've implemented part of this, you can't tell whether they intended it to come to you or not, because at that point, you don't have the anti-spam advantage that you have of a fully authenticated chain. Obviously, until each hop implements whatever this is, there's going to be holes where messages come through and you have to run heuristics on them. But I want to build something that can get to a point where you don't need to run those heuristics anymore. You look at all the signers on the message and you know each of these implement the new standard. Hence, they have to have done it correctly or I can reject this message outright. And it's that ability to close that hole that I think is the only real reason to do this. Regarding the specific standards, I think DKIM has a lot of good stuff. I would be happy to work from that as well. But again, I think we need to complete the steps to get there. Also with Stefan's draft, it had a lot of things in there and I don't think it is as complete in what it does, particularly the diffing stuff. I think in there, it requires a diff that also includes what's being removed. What's being removed is also in the message. So I think it creates larger and more complex diffs than what I put in the Delta draft. But again, the Delta draft had a couple of different ideas in it. It's certainly not complete. There's certainly more discussion and experimentation to have there to work out what works. There was a question of whether diff is required here. And that's one of the cases where the ability to reject and to tell who did the bad acting, you need to have it. Otherwise, you wind up in the situation we have with ARC now, where an intermediate can wind up saying, I got this message and all I've done is added a header and put some completely different content there. And the intermediate can claim, I checked the signature and it was valid when it came to me, and be straight out lying. And there's no way you can check its work. The point of the Delta diff, whatever you want to call it, ability to undo and see what the content of the previous message was, is you can check the previous hop's work. You can tell if they're lying to you. And I think that's necessary in order to really close the gap there. And likewise, for the bounce handling, I think the ability to check the path and send it back down the path is important. So putting those additional requirements on mail forwarders, that they are responsible for dealing with bounces, is necessary to really make this work. I think that's all the things, but I'm sure I'll have more.
All right. Oh, Murray, you put yourself in the queue.
Sorry, yes, I wanted to just chat about, so let's use Dave's chart as an example. It reduces, well, it breaks things down into about 10 issues. So we'll try to imagine, I don't want to actually do this, but try to imagine we produce 10 drafts, which each attacks one of these things and attempts to solve them. There's some advantage to doing it that way or in that direction, because now if we want to update something, we don't have to update an omnibus document. We can update these individual smaller ones. Sometimes that's preferable, sometimes not. That's worth considering. Some of this stuff that we're trying to accomplish might be purely incremental over DKIM. That also makes it easier for us to do some of these things. I realize a few of them are not. Maybe some of those points would guide us towards how we want to arrange the work into additional documents. That's all I wanted to say.
All right, Dave, you're up in the queue.
Hello again. So in the early days of programming, there was an attempt to impose some discipline in how people programmed, and an indication of how bad it was prior to that was a term that may or may not still be in use called spaghetti code. And the attempt to develop what was then, and I think still, is called structured programming. It's probably not used that much as a term because the action is so ingrained in how code is written that people don't need to be distinguished from spaghetti code all that often. The danger we have here is a spaghetti code kind of design approach because of a set of perfectly reasonable final goals, getting confused with how to get to them. In the structured programming debates long ago, there were people who said, well, you need to design from the top down. And there were people who said, no, you need to design from the bottom up. The bottom up meaning you define a whole lot of components and then you put them together. The top down says you define the whole thing and then you add the pieces below. When actual programming that was successful was discovered by for people who were structured, who produced well-structured code, the process turned to be something that was called inside out, which is a combination of the two. The proposal that I'm making for breaking things down into the constituent functional components is not that that's the final goal, but that that's where we should start in order to get clarity about the pieces. The discussion that's already happened today, I think, exemplifies some of the challenge here in a confusion between what are the component pieces and how do we talk about them as components versus what is the final goal. Talking about something like decor is not to the exclusion of the other functions. It's an attempt to create focus on that. And oh, by the way, to do it in a way that is compatible with the installed base. There's nothing wrong with being compatible with the installed base. The current work that was submitted to us tosses out compatibility completely from the start. And it took a long time to get to the point where that was clear, but from the document, it seemed to me pretty clear right away. And I understand being convinced that the only way to get to the final point is to toss out the existing work, but I don't happen to agree with it. And to the extent that we get to a point where there must not be compatibility, okay, that's an incremental process of discussion. Having the incremental discussion and possibly separate pieces of documentation is not in any way to the exclusion of the final set of goals. Let's see. Nope, I'll stop there.
Braun, you want to come up?
Yep. Addressing the tosses out, the major component that's kept is not the header field name or the verifier being able to verify part but not all of what's put in one of these headers, which I think is dangerous and wrong. And the reason that I think it's dangerous and wrong to allow a naive validator to be able to validate part of one of these headers is that what's going to happen is for legitimate DKIM2 cases where a message has been forwarded and changed, for example, by a mailing list, a naive DKIM verifier that only verifies the domain and the hashes will then say that this is an invalid DKIM message and reject it when that's not what's expected. And so I think this would actually break to allow naive verifiers to verify this and believe they are doing the right thing when there's additional data in there. If you get to the point where you say they can't validate one of these things, then the header name is doesn't matter. And so to have something that doesn't understand this, try to validate it, will actually make it more brittle and less useful. I also wanted to address the question of bad actor. I think my definition of bad actor is a host that either lies about the validation it did on previous keys or lies about having received the message organically and creates something as if it had received the message when it actually hadn't. It had stripped off some later headers and then re-added the message as if it had come to it directly. They are the main bad actor cases, and maybe we should enumerate those things. I think bad actor is generally someone who's trying to interrupt the mail flow and behave in a way that it wouldn't have acted naturally. But that's a very woolly definition, and I'd be very happy to have a better one.
And before you sit down, Dave wanted to talk on the specific first point,
Yep.
and so why don't you go back and forth a bit before we jump the queue here?
Okay, thanks.
Hi, thanks. So this will be interesting. I haven't done this in this way before. The fact that when you were up just before, you immediately jumped to the end point of the full set of the necessary features as you guys see them. I think that exemplifies this challenge of separating what are the pieces we need to develop from what the endpoint needs to be. And so saying, for example, that a limitation to DCore is that it doesn't include diff, from my design standpoint, makes literally no sense. I understand that at the end point of evaluating an actor or a message, you want them together, and that makes complete sense to me. But needing them to be in the same spec does not make any sense at all to me. And so I would really appreciate your clarifying why you think the technical specification of these two functions needs to be together.
Okay. I believe they need to be together because without both of them, you can't get the properties that I believe are necessary from this. And the property is the ability to verify the work of previous hops. So the ability to not have to implicitly trust any one of the signers because you can any one of the verifiers, because you can check their work as the final recipient. I believe that is absolutely necessary to not create a hole through which spam can still sneak, pretending to a bad actor, per my previous definition, to take a message, file off part of the headers, and then recreate a different chain on it. And without that, I don't believe it's actually even heading in the right direction. I don't believe it's worth doing the work.
But what you're describing is the how to integrate the use of these components,
Yes.
rather than how to define the components.
Okay. I don't believe it's worth defining individual components without an idea of which direction you're heading, because then you're creating components that aren't part of an integrated solution. And I believe an integrated solution is necessary. Now we can say we'll define.
So if I heard you right, what you just said is you can't define the components unless you integrate them together in the same document, because the goal of their working together will be lost.
You can define the individual documents separately, that's fine, but you need to know what the eventual goal is. And
sure.
The eventual goal includes that it interoperates with existing DKIM verifiers without them returning false negatives or negatives that shouldn't have been returned in the complete solution. So if we keep a DKIM signature header and the DKIM signature header is verified by naive verifiers, then they will say this message is corrupted, this message does not validate as DKIM, and they'll be correct. But it would have validated if they had understood the full DKIM2. And so that answers why it needs to be a different header and why it needs to not.
I'm sorry, I didn't. So I apologize. I didn't follow what you just said.
If we were to extend the DKIM signature such that we expect it to be validated by existing DKIM validators, then messages that have gone through a mailing list, been modified, for example, will fail validation to a naive validator when we expect them to be correct, and they have done the correct DKIM2 or whatever DCOR headers. And so there is a correct DCOR chain. A validator that believes it's validating DKIM signature will say that that is an invalid message. And so it would be more likely to be rejected by some sites.
So I think what I'm hearing you say is that doing a component, doing one of the components without the other will lead to a worse outcome than doing them together. But that misses whether it permits doing a better outcome than what we have now.
I don't think it's worth the work of that partial better outcome, because it still doesn't let you see messages that are definitely incorrect. And so there's still space to smuggle the kind of things that we're seeing now with DKIM replay in.
So you're looking for perfection.
I'm looking for completeness. It's not perfection, but I'm looking for coverage of the space.
My point is the language you're using is very worried about permitting certain failure conditions. And that implies an expectation that we won't have any failure conditions when everything is in place.
It's about saying that in a bunch of things that now could be a legitimate failure condition or could be a correctly sent message, you can say this must be a failure condition. I can reject this. And we have a bounce process that allows you to reject it to the previous hop, even if it happens further down the chain. So you can send a clean bounce back to the sender and say, this can't get through, there's a problem.
I think let's move on to Richard and see where we are in a bit.
Thanks.
Thanks, guys.
Okay, I want to push back on the notion that the draft, the bronze draft, breaks everything in sight, because I don't think that is true. First of all, the draft is a result of long discussion. As you may have seen, the original thing turned up with Bron's name, my name from Yahoo, Bron's from Fastmail, as you know, my name, I'm from Yahoo, Wei's name, he is from Google. So basically, we reached across industry in order to talk about the problems which we had as an industry in handling large volumes of mail with large numbers of DKIM signatures, with so basically trying to understand what our problems with what were in the real world with DKIM. Now, I understand that is not all mail flows fully and so forth, but there's quite a lot of mail there, so we have quite a lot of experience. And the reason, and we've turned up with drafts which give a sort of fully formed solution. There are holes in it. There are bits where we're not sure what the community thinks the solution should look like. But we tried to turn up with something which is basically fully formed, because we've been talking about this for a long time, and therefore we have considered the various trade-offs, engineering trade-offs in various solutions, and we have picked one way forward, and that's why our draft is rather more complete. And I don't think we should apologize for that, or say that, or accept people saying, well, it's too complete, you've got too many things in there and so forth. It's because we've actually done all these things and put them all together into one document. Now, in fact, we have split out.
Let me interrupt you at this point, Richard. I don't think that the fact that it comes out of a long discussion or that it comes out of any particular set of people is relevant to the discussion here. And I don't believe anybody is being blamed for the form it came out in. The question on the table, and it's interesting to me, sitting from the chair perspective, the question on the table seems to be simply the approach that the group should take, whether it should be a component at a time, or whether it should be something more unified, or even what I heard Bron saying was something akin to a hybrid. It might be okay to split out into different documents to make the work cleaner for some reason, but to develop things in parallel so that we accomplish the overall architecture that fits together. Those are, to me, valid approaches to this discussion. What I find interesting is, with the exception of Stefan's draft, which people are had trouble getting through and understanding how it would fit in, the debate here seems to be about how we go forward with the work, not about the particular technical details, although I do hear that some folks think there's stuff still missing from DCOR that would make it a good starting point. But I just wanted to say it is irrelevant to me as chair that it's been a long discussion with a bunch of people. I want to hear what the technical and process use of doing it one way or the other is.
Okay. Well, perhaps I could address the splitting things up, because we've already split some things up. We split out the algebra document, the header the modification description, because basically we felt that that was one of the areas where the correct way of engineering that was unclear. It's unclear whether or not it should be line-based or byte-based. It's unclear whether or not we should work on rendered versions of the document or on the raw document itself, and so forth. And being able to iterate around that in a separate document and keeping those discussions separate from discussion on the document as a whole seemed positive to us. We also split out the keys, because one of the things which we have not changed is we've reused the DKIM keys, which are in fact reused earlier protocol keys, which is why they have funny names. And from a point of view of the mail sending industry, that means that almost everybody who uses the new scheme will not have to do anything at all apart from update their software. And people update software all the time, because it has security flaws and so forth. So we didn't see updating things as being a big deal compared with getting millions of small senders to change their keys, for example, even though there were various technical reasons why we felt changing keys would be an extremely good idea. We decided against that, specifically for that. But we have split out documents. We think splitting out documents for particular topics which are completely self-contained is a good idea. But I'm very much with Bron that on the point of view that various of the things interact with each other, and therefore discussing them as a whole rather than just trying to design exactly what bit of this new of the new scheme is going to tackle problem number one, what's going to tackle problem number two, because some of these things interact with each other, and therefore discussing them as a whole is going to be avoid a lot of feature interaction, which is intended and otherwise confuses us. And secondly, I think it'll be quite a lot quicker.
Thanks, Richard. Bron, you're next in the queue.
Me again, pretty much responding to chat. Upgrading software, which is the most recent thing, doesn't happen fast, but particularly, and this is where Richard's appeal to authority has some validity, when you have systems the scale of Google and Yahoo saying in 3 years, do this or we will stop accepting mail from you, that is a large enough forcing function to make people upgrade. It's not nice to say it, but it's true. That is how the world works. It's the reason why you basically have to support HTTPS on your website if you want people to be able to browse to it now. It's not because everybody decided it was the best thing to do. It's because web browsers started saying, do this or you'll get a giant red banner and multiple click-throughs before you can get to the page in the browser. So the way to push adoption of something like this is to have large enough players say, you need to do this now or we will stop talking to you. That's a necessary component of having something like this completely distributed. It will take years. I accept it will take years. The alternative is to not do it and to have these holes remain forever. And so that's why I think it's necessary to have it be complete enough that you can actually stop anything that hasn't gone through domain aligned signatures all the way. And hence it needs to cover all the cases for that.
Jim, you're up to bat.
Hi, Jim Fenton. I'll start by admitting that I'm one of the people that answered no to the poll about being up to date on the documents. So feel free to shout me down on that basis alone.
We we adjust. We are charitable up here at the front of the room.
Thank you for your grace, Sir Chair. The question of compatibility, we seem to be getting focused on a particular case where the message in question is going through a mailing list and it's breaking legacy DKIM signature, and it will pass a DKIM 2 signature. But I think that we're kind of also ignoring the case where the message would pass a normal DKIM signature and sort of saying, well, you shouldn't be using, if you're using DKIM 2, you shouldn't pay any attention to DKIM. But in fact, DKIM still on an awful lot of messages is going to tell you something for those senders that haven't yet updated. And it feels like the question of what passes and so forth, this is like a multi-dimensional problem, and I'm having these horrible flashbacks to Carnot maps from logic design class. But I kind of think we need to consider all of the cases there, and I'm really concerned about ending up in a situation where there are a lot of senders and receivers that only understand DKIM, and a lot of senders and receivers that only understand DKIM 2, and never the twain shall meet. And I think that would be a really bad situation.
Well, let me ask you a question, Jim, because to put it back in the form of the adoptability question, are you saying, and this might be a reasonable thing, are you saying that the transition mechanism from DKIM to DKIM 2 or whatever we're calling it would be a necessary component of Braun's draft for you to see it as, even if it's a stub at this point, not complete, but you think the how to stay with DKIM if that's what you use, but then get to DKIM 2, that's a necessary component for you for adoptability?
Yeah, either in the draft itself or as some kind of a applicability statement or something like that that deals with the transition. We need to consider it.
Thanks, that's helpful. John Levine, you're up next.
Yes, I have read the first two drafts and attempted to read the third, which I think puts me in with everybody else's. And sort of popping things off the stack, with Jim's point, I agree with you that it's something we need to think about. And one of the reasons that I think it needs to be a separate header and a different protocol is so that you can sign with both. And so the people who only understand current DKIM can get what they can get out of current DKIM. And even if you only have one signature on it, the bit with encoding the envelope lets you lets you detect replays, even if there's no modification in between. If there is a modification in between, the validation is fundamentally different. In that DKIM currently, if there's 4 signatures, you basically look at 4 signatures independently and come out with 4 separate, excuse me, 4 separate answers. Whereas with DKIM2, the signatures are chained, and you evaluate them bottom to top, applying the diffs in between, and you basically come up with one answer that says that either the chain is valid or the chain is broken. And I think that is different enough from the way that DKIM works that it is not useful to try to see if we could shoehorn that into DKIM somehow. I mean, like, we could add a bunch of new incompatible tags in DKIM that would break the current validators if something's changed, but that seems sort of passive aggressive. And if it's different, we should just make it different. So I think my summary is that I prefer bronze draft. I think that the components interact enough that I don't think it would be a good use of our time to try to imagine if there's ways we could we do multiple signatures without diff? Because I'm pretty sure the answer is no. So I think bronze draft is the best place to start here.
Dave, you're up next.
So first of all, the statement that adoption of DKIM2 will take years needs to be thought of in terms of a decade or two, because that's the time scale that we typically see for adoption, and especially replacement. IPv6 ignored transition from IPv4, and we are somewhere around 30 years, and it's still going. Transitions that take place without regard to the transition process take a long time. And so the reality, even with the market pressure of the big providers, has already demonstrated adoption barriers that are quite serious. But somehow that's not finding its way into the discussion here. The thing that John just said that I want to underscore as being a problem in the discussion that's happening generally is to say that compatibility with, to say that trying to quote unquote stuff things into the existing DKIM is a problem. I don't think I've suggested stuffing things into DKIM. My point is that the DKIM signing engine works fine, that almost all of the functions that are being proposed are value add on top of that. That's exactly what DCore is trying to demonstrate. It is adding end-to-end functionality that does not require changing DKIM, but it's a significant addition to functionality, and that I believe we can do more of that. To the extent there are examples where we can't, then we need to have different, what do I want to say? Alternative to DKIM, maybe. But this approach to burying things in DKIM is an easy thing to do as a spec, but replacing an existing installed base of a signing engine that has very wide deployment is not so easy. And the idea that quote unquote just upgrading software is the only issue does not conform with experience over the history of the internet.
And we have on the clock about 10 more minutes for this topic, but I think actually we're getting somewhere. Arndt, you're up to the mic now.
Arndt, Dave said what I wanted to say, but it's worth saying again. The alternative to years isn't months, it's decades, I should know. If one of these things has a realistic path to getting stuff done in years, then there's no competition. There's no question. Thanks.
I find myself also agreeing with Dave, I think here. Years is the best case. The second best time to plant a tree is now. We didn't plant it 20 years ago. I still think even with decades, it's better than not doing it. And I think that was the main thing I wanted to say. Yes, we're going to have to maybe DKIM signature as the first hop is viable because it doesn't have any changes in it, so long as the necessary headers are signed. I think that's something we could look at, and that gives us a cleaner upgrade path. You can do one or the other or both or something. Looking at that part of transition is definitely worthwhile. My experimental DKIM2 signing code uses the DKIM signing engine, and I feed in a bunch of headers and then just do a little bit of massaging on what comes out. It's using the same algorithms, it's using the same keys. It is using the library rather than the API maybe, and it's calling into the library rather than just generating a DKIM2-signature named header, but it is still a lot of the same stuff. It's using a lot of the same framework, which means that as somebody developing the software, it's a lot easier because you're using that installed engine already and just driving it slightly differently. You're not building something brand new from scratch. I do think locking in these headers must be signed in order for something to be considered valid is important, because otherwise you wind up with gaps where important headers aren't covered by the signature, and then someone can fake that part of the message and have it still look legitimate. But overall, I think most of the stuff we need is already in DKIM. It's more just a matter of closing the gaps where things can be smuggled through at the moment.
Thanks. And before Richard, I just want to say, you'll notice that both Murray and I are in the chat and trying to follow along. There's a lot going on in there, but I think all of this discussion and what's going on in the chat, we're going to end up summarizing to the list, because I think I have delusions that we're actually converging somewhere.
Sorry, just quickly, if Richard, because I saw Richard was in the queue, if he didn't see in the chat that people were asking about examples of ARC being checked and having fraud done in it, I know Richard has examples of that.
Richard, go ahead.
Well, first of all, I'll say what I was going to say, which is that I don't think that there are more than 10, possibly 20 DKIM implementations in the world. The code base, it is not something which everybody in site has implemented. Almost everybody who I know of has at least started from one of the open source libraries and has used that. So it's not a question of so updating the software is about a very small number of people doing some work in order to change things. As Bron has just said, what we're proposing does not change things like the keys. It does not change things like the algorithms for actually signing the body and so forth. So large amounts of the code can just be cut and pasted into the new DKIM2 library. I have seen one existing example which basically produces DKIM1 and DKIM2 signatures in parallel. Alan might like to talk about how long it took him to do that. That it is not a vast amount of work to do this. Depending on what we do about multiple single destination, multiple destination, which is still a very open area in my view, then MTA changes may be required. There are more MTAs than there are DKIM libraries and so forth. So that is much more of an issue, and that requires much more caution about how much we do and how much we require MTAs to change things. That's the first thing. The second thing is ARC is borderline useless. In day job, I have been we've been doing work to use ARC in order to assess what is going on, and we find that people generate ARC headers when stuff comes into their system. They then lose track of it, allow bad people to modify things, allow people to put it back into their system, have failed to notice that the bad people have had hold of it, and they just extend the ARC chain and give it to us. And we look at that and we say, hang on a moment, this email did not originally come from Instagram. It did not originally come from Twitch or whatever it may be. Yes, it did originally come from there, and there's an ARC signature that says so from somebody I trust, but it has been modified by somebody I totally do not trust into a very wicked email indeed, and ARC just does nothing in order to assist us in dealing with this, and it is arguable we're going to turn off our ARC processing rather than try and fix it. So ARC does not solve anything in the DKIM replay space in the real world, and we need to move on from that and adopt something which does do that. And yes, the big players are all very interested in this because it solves real problems for them. Yes, they are going to produce some pressure, which will cause people to do this. But the amount of DKIM signing has gone up by an order of magnitude, if not 2 orders of magnitude, solely because of Yahoogle, the pressure from the big suppliers saying, if you want to send us mail, then you have to authenticate it. And when DKIM2 exists and is standardized, then DKIM2 will be the way forward, and roadmaps will be set out at that point as to when you need to do this if you want to send to those people. And maybe you don't, and that's just fine. And you don't have to authenticate your mail if you don't want to. That's up to you.
Thanks, Richard. Alan, you're next, and I'll note there's 3 minutes left, so you've got, I'll say, 1 minute to jump in the queue before we lock it down.
Okay. I mean, I'll echo Richard's feeling that ARC isn't particularly useful. I believe we use it for certain things that I don't know exactly the details of, but in general, yeah, the fact that it depends on you trusting the person that signed, or the system that did the ARC signing, to have done something correct and not malicious is kind of a very limiting factor. Richard's other comment about how hard it is to implement this. I think I implemented this in a weekend by massaging the inputs into a DKIM signing library to, sign. I mean, the body part doesn't change. We, like, DKIM2 didn't change anything about how body hashing works. Header hashing and signature generation changes in the sense that the list of header fields that need to be hashed is different, but the ordering, well, I mean, even the ordering doesn't matter if you've implemented it in a way where you feed the hasher a list of lines and you get back a hash or a signature. DKIM2 doesn't propose anything that's incompatible with that. So it was actually pretty easy to re-implement. Admittedly, I haven't looked at OpenDKIM, so I don't know if that library has an abstraction that makes that easy, but I would be surprised if it's like an insurmountable effort that needs basically a whole new implementation.
I see we have an empty queue. This has been incredibly useful to me, I can say. I think we have definitely, the transition strategy and all sorts of angles of that seem to be an interesting linchpin here. So, like I said, I think we'll summarize and bring that to the list. And I'll pass to Murray to lead the discussion on the Motivation.
stuff. Okay. I mean, I'm going to punt most of this initially to Braun, but I wanted to mention we did close adoption on this. So Braun, whenever you want to submit the IETF DKIM version of this, thank you. Do you have a list of, we don't have a list of issues. Do you have a list of stuff you want to bring up and bring to that? You can either Mike if you want.
I don't have a list of issues for this. I think it covers the key areas that I believe we need to solve. Obviously, since I wrote it, I thought it covered those things. I'm not aware of things. I'd love to hear if people think there are things missing. I'm very happy to revise it if it hasn't covered everything that we need.
Or certainly send text if you have stuff that you want to change. But is there anyone in the call or in the meeting who has issues with the motivations document? We have 10, 20 minutes. We have some time to talk about this.
Oh, yes.
Go ahead, Brian. Or are you just waiting?
I'm just waiting. I figure
I'm sorry.
I'll be have things to answer.
I didn't look at the queue. Go ahead, Dave.
Hi. So I noticed that the name of the motivation document got changed. And that's almost unfortunate because the scope of the document is considerably broader, or at least my reading of it says it's considerably broader than the more narrow focus that the title implies. And the list of 9 features from that document that the table produces, I think exemplifies that. And I'm concerned with a tendency in discussion to conflate things down in that way. I think it doesn't help an understanding of the complexity of what this effort is trying to do. I also noted, and I sent a note just this morning, I had skipped over it when I was going through things last night. The term security gateway, I raised this before. It's not a term of art, needs to be defined. And I think equally, the document could benefit from some effort to think about reorganizing pieces to make better sense. There's really 2 sections that try to list motivation and rather than 1, and they do it in a way that's kind of disjointed. Some of this is probably only document editing, which is to say editorial. Some of this may be substantial. I couldn't quite tell.
That's fine. I'm happy to reorganize it. Regarding the question of whether it's too broad a scope, I'd love to have some specific ideas of what could be reduced in scope. Certainly one thing that has expanded in scope from what it had before was having a more general, the specific recipients must be identified in the message rather than there must be only one recipient. That kind of design decision, I looked at what the actual necessity was, and the necessity was to be able to identify whether you were an intended recipient rather than whether you were the only recipient of this particular copy. And there's been some discussion on the list about that. So where possible, I've tried to more generally say these are the necessary properties of a system that allows exclusion of messages that haven't gone deliberately from domain to domain, rather than narrowing it down to specific design decisions. I've tried to pull as much of the design as possible out of it, and that does make it more general. I'm happy to bring it back down again as we have a more specific design, but I didn't want to exclude designs for the rest of the protocol in the motivations draft. I just wanted to cover the key points that it needs to be able to do.
We were talking muted up here a little while ago about we are chartered to produce an applicability statement, and it's come up that we can use our experience as we develop this to come up with the transition plan and make that part of the applicability statement. I think it's premature to start that work now, but I think do we all agree, I suppose, that that's the way that we should use this document, and we should start it as soon as we have, like, there's been some private experience, I would say, with DKIM2, what the implementation, what the the private work has done, we should wait until there are open implementations, at least one or two interoperating before we start that work up. And we don't have to identify the editor now or anything like that. Does that jive with everybody in the room about how we should organize this work? Nods, thumbs up. Okay. Were there other points on motivation? I'll take myself out of the queue. Either from the room or from Braun. Braun has seated, so I think that he might be done here unless there's other stuff to discuss. Okay. Brainerd.
So the other thing I wanted to put up as a possibility, and we heard a little bit about the diff draft that we wanted to possibly adopt sooner rather than later, although I want to get through the discussion on the list of the headers draft after Murray and I get a chance to summarize what's going on here. Are there other drafts that we think we need to take up sooner rather than later, or particular topics that you think we need to get someone with a pen and someone with a draft going? Go ahead, Brian.
I think the two other key pieces that are in separate drafts at the moment are everything around DNS and the bounce handling, bounce format, bounce processing. Whether we adopt them and work on them together or do things separately, I guess is a chair processing issue. But I think they're necessary components of a complete solution, and certainly to have an applicability statement, it would need to address all of those.
Thanks. Taken under advisement. Jim?
Yeah, hi, Jim Fenton again. It's been, I think, kind of an assumption here that that DKIM2 is going to use compatible key records in DNS with DKIM. And one of the things that I'm concerned about is in a lot of other areas, we're starting to be concerned with post-quantum algorithms. And those algorithms typically involve really huge keys. And we've kind of addressed that. We've kind of approached that before on this decrypt effort and so forth. But I'd kind of like to raise it again, because with DKIM2, I think we have an opportunity there to introduce something that is going to better accommodate post-quantum algorithms.
I think that's a good point. And you're right. We did deal with this with decrypt. It's had mixed success. I know, John, you have some information about how many of the ED2, whatever that number is, right? Those keys. How much adoption have we seen since we did that work? And Andy, I'm coming to you next. I know you saw this coming.
Sorry, in answer to your question, the amount of adoption we've seen with ED 25519 rounds to zero. But the reason is because RSA keys work just fine. And the other reason is that the current version of DKIM makes double signing kind of painful because you need separate selectors. But Jim's point is well taken. And we might reconsider what you did with IAM, putting the key in the signature, just putting a hash in the DNS. But I think we could keep the same key record. We just have we basically say the interpretation of this thing, which is called the key, is in fact the hash. I don't think that would require any significant changes to the format.
What's the concern, Jim, with large keys or large signatures? I mean, the signature is just going to make the header big.
Yeah, the problem with large keys is that DNS records have a fixed. I mean, you can't put more than 64K of anything into a DNS record, and the reality is, if you go past 50K, things will blow up if you try to sign them. However, my guess is that the DNSSEC people will solve this before we do, because they have the problem twice as bad as we do.
That's so. Even if you switch to TCP, or is that in?
There's a 16-bit length field. That's
That's
it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so here comes the Andy question. Do we want to pick this up here, or would we do a decrypt again? I don't care either way, I don't think. One is a recharter, one is a charter with different chairs.
How long do we think it's going to take?
I think we know how to do this reasonably well. We can just do what we did with DKIM again for the most part. But this working group is not chartered. It's probably counter-chartered to take up crypto type things. So it's got to land somewhere. Does it land here or does it land in some adjacent working group? Up to you, I think.
Yeah, I mean, my blink reaction is it probably belongs here.
Okay.
But we would need to discuss how that would happen. So
Okay.
it would, let me put a note that I need to think about that.
We can always dig up, dust off the DKIM charter and take words from it. That might make things easier. Alan.
So one of the primary motivations for reusing DKIM keys, like the way that DKIM keys are published in DNS, is that email service providers, whether that's mailbox providers or sending service providers, have a very, very, very difficult time convincing their customers to do anything with respect to DNS. And so by reusing the existing DKIM1 RSA keys as signing keys for DKIM2, it greatly reduces barrier to adoption. A mailbox provider that has DKIM1 signing keys can implement DKIM2 without needing to reach out to every one of their customers to publish a new DKIM key or a DKIM2 key if we were to mandate that DKIM2 have completely separate keys. I think that's separate from the question of whether DKIM2 could recommend doing something new for the DKIM2 keys, such as publishing a new key or a new algorithm types, or saying that like the post quantum algorithm type, the k equals whatever the key material bit of the record is. Like you just have to understand that for this algorithm, that's actually a hash of a key that's included in the message, let's say, if we want to get the key out of DNS because we have to for length reasons.
Thanks.
There is no shame in ending early, but any other business? The mic queue is open.
Everybody knows what they need to go do.
I think the chairs know what we're doing. Oh, Brian wants to say something. Excellent. We love when we don't have to babble incoherently.
Well, I was just going to say one of the big open questions that I don't have a good idea on is whether we should be signing an explicit list of headers or explicitly not signing particular headers and signing everything else. I'd love to have an idea from the room here of what people think. Is it better to include or exclude what's signed?
How has the guidance in 6376 been working? Which is, I think I remember it's a particular list of stuff you really ought to sign, but then otherwise it's wavy guidance on you should sign anything that changes the way a message is displayed or rendered or something like that. Has that been good enough?
I don't get as much mail as some sites who are saying they do get the occasional case of people who don't sign subject or don't sign from or things like that, which leaves a big hole. So for sure, we should at least have must sign on a bunch of headers. And at that point, you don't then need to pad out the header with these are the ones that I've signed. But at the point that we have an easier way of saying what you've added, if you had exclude these headers from, or a diff that said these headers were added, cut them out to get back to the previous signature, then we could sign everything. And that, other than known trace headers, which are noisy and loud, like received, if you sign everything else, it's not that much more work. And it's more clear what you added, because no hop after that can add additional headers with who knows what meaning without explicitly stating that they added it and that wasn't present beforehand. And that gives, it's safer and it's harder to screw up.
It just made a huge queue on this topic. So much for getting out of here quickly.
Well, sorry.
So no, that's okay. It's all right. I just want to point out that we went through a journey between like 4871, which was the first DKIM document, which did give a full list. Then we backed away from that, saying something much more hand wavy. If we're going to go back in that direction again, I think we just need to be very clear about why we did and what the experience was. Wei.
Yeah, so basically I was hoping to jump in actually a little bit earlier around the question about redoing decrypt for large key sizes, and basically wanted to put in a plug for doing it here. And I guess I can just take out the list. I was just curious as to how folks were planning on doing that in DNS, or did we have to do other things? Maybe it can talk a little bit to the other point around headers. I agree that with Dave's earlier comment that we definitely should re-examine what has to be done with this notion of redoing the headers and which headers have to be hashed. I think, we should examine, how there's been proposed alternatives, I think, out on the list. And it's definitely good to examine those alternatives, but there's also value in the existing system and keeping that compatibility with existing engines, I think. There is also some advantages with regards to the support for forwarders by doing that, because it does provide a mechanism to say which headers are actually being covered by the hash. And then, so if there are new things being added, it's easy to discover the new things. And that's part of this concept of algebra. Otherwise, every time a forwarder adds a new header, you have to do some other explicit stuff to go describe what they are. And in any case, I think we should, in those discussions out on the list about this sort of reevaluation headers, endeavor to create some examples so we can see the cost of those additional new approaches. So that's my comment.
If I could quickly just respond to that. One great thing about having all the headers signed all the time is that if you remove a header from the message, you have to describe that, or the old signatures fail. So you have to say what you took out. You can't remove a header without putting a copy of it somewhere in there to say, I removed this header. And that allows the earlier hops to safely have things that they put in the header and can't be stripped off later.
I was thinking more about the case where the forwarders add things, and then that addition, I guess, right now is succinctly described by changes in that H equals. Otherwise, you would have to do something else that says, okay, this forwarder added this header in terms of the algebra.
You have to add a remove for that header in the DKIM2 delta headers. You'd have to say, remove this to get back to the previous message.
Right, exactly.
Yep, Richards.
Okay. First of all, signing headers is one of the areas where I think that the existing code in existing code bases should be improved, because at the moment, in order to protect your subject header field from somebody who adds a second subject header field, you basically have to mention subject twice in order to indicate that you're signing a real subject header field which is actually present, and a non-existent blank subject header field which is not present. And the reason for this is because if you allow people to add extra subject header fields or extra from lines or whatever it may be, then you end up in a situation that half the system checks the first one, and the other part of the system displays the second one to the user. And there's been a certain amount of academic work in this space identifying the ways in which this fails left, right, and center, and sending messages through chains of particular mail handling systems will cause very bad things to happen, and so forth. And you get a nice paper and a lot of citations for this work. It may not be practical in the real world to do these attacks at scale, but nevertheless, that they are a concern, and we should address those. So first of all, I would like to see us signing every instance of a particular header, and so that if people add another one, even if that's not RFC compliant, then the signature will fail. The second thing is to ask whether or not what we should do is allow people to specify their own list. I'm not a big fan of this. I think people are very sloppy about doing that, and as a result of which we get poorer security than we should do, and therefore forcing people to sign a suitable list would be a good idea. The problem is when you start working out what a suitable list is, and you go off and consult the IANA maintained list of email headers, that is a very long list indeed. It includes a number of things which I don't think actually have ever occurred at any scale in email headers, certainly in the last 2 decades, because people once wrote down every header they'd ever seen and stuck it in an RFC. And the other problem is that if you do have a prescriptive list, then when people invent new headers, they come back a couple of days' time for MailMaint and invent new headers, and they matter and they have some security effect. I'm thinking of, say, of expires. Then if we didn't list those because they didn't exist at the time, then we'd still like people to sign them, but what are we going to do? Reissue the RFC and change that? That's the sort of thing which is really difficult. I think we get one chance to change DKIM, and we have to do it all right. And therefore, I didn't like it at first, but I've become a fan of Bron's approach, which says we sign every header there is, apart from some explicit list of things, basically the trace fields, i.e. received header fields, and perhaps one or two other trace related ones, and we don't sign those. And I think the challenge for the algebra business is to provide a succinct way of saying, I added this custom header, and Yahoo adds all sorts of exotic custom headers, as do many other mail handling systems for their own protection, for their own traceability requirements. Some way of saying, I've added this exotic header, which is unique, and therefore I don't have to do a full diff algebra saying I added this header and this is what I added, and you end up with the thing twice. You can just say I added a header whose the bit before the colon was this. I added it at this hop. If you want to work backwards to see whether or not the signatures before me work out, then you just have to remove this. And I think we can make the algebra look fairly tidy, and perhaps we don't even need to put it in the algebra. We can put that sort of addition into the DKIM2 header itself. So I'm a fan of Bron's approach of sign everything except some short list of things which we are not going to sign. And then we just have to write down the details as to whether or not we're going to sort the headers, whether or not we're going to sort them by the name of the header, the bit left of the colon, or whether or not we're going to sort the whole thing. I'm not a fan of that because of wrapping. I think that would be really complicated to implement the sort. But sorting them into a well-known order and then sticking the things that matter for the way in which the protocol works, like the DKIM headers themselves, DKIM2 headers themselves, and sticking those at the end, so that it is easy to generate almost all of a signature, and then do variants of the email, perhaps because you'll be CCing it or something. Then doing those at the end would, not in alphabetical order, would make some sense. So that is the approach which I would like to see us take forward.
I heard one thing in there that I do want to add to the Delta, which is say, I added a bunch of headers with this prefix. Please strip all of them as a single item. I think might be valuable. Other than that, the Delta already allows you to list header names and say, just strip off all of these. These are the ones I added. But a prefix sounds like a good addition to that. It sucks if the mail goes through your system twice, but that's life.
Barry.
This is Barry Lieba. I gather from Richard that the too long didn't listen version of what he said was sign almost everything. The too long didn't listen version of mine will be sign everything completely. Murray, you mentioned that the first version of the DKIM spec had some set of fields listed and then we stripped them out. The history for those who weren't around is that we didn't want to put that in. And we put it in because an AD demanded it in order to clear a discuss. We took it back out in the second version because that AD wasn't an AD anymore and the IASG at the time didn't care. So I think if we say you must sign these header fields, the implementations will either sign everything or sign only those. And a lot of implementations will just sign only those because after all, that's what it says in the spec. So I think the right answer is not to try to pick and choose or guess, as Ron has said, that you can unwind it all if there are stripped header fields and stuff, sign everything and have done with it.
The specific issue with that, sorry, I don't keep adding myself to the queue because my computer's all the way over there. Specific issue with that is things like received headers. You need to have a way to say, these are the ones that were present the previous time and these are the ones I've added afterwards. And so we would need a very clear way to say what's additional now and wasn't there before. But if so, I agree, sign everything. If there's a clear way to say these are the new versions, this is what was there before. Possibly with header order, but there are systems that reorder headers.
At the risk of making a couple of people in the room scream, can we pin this to trace header fields?
That was the idea, to just say trace headers. Trace headers are not signed. Everything else is signed. Okay. The challenge there is adding a new trace header because systems need to understand. As soon as you set this list, you can't really have your software go and check the INO registry every time to figure out what's in the signature and what isn't. So new trace headers would have to be explicitly listed as excluded from the signature by systems at the point that they started implementing those trace headers.
Yeah, email core just made changes to the registry to make it very clear which ones are or aren't. Hopefully that was helpful.
Yeah, this is Barry. Adding back to that, people will screw that up. If you say sign everything but the trace headers, people will screw it up and not know what the trace headers are and get it wrong. Sign everything. Use the figure out what changed code to deal with stripping that and stripping trace fields and whatever. There's value in the received lines, and it's useful to know. It's useful to have them signed so you know they're legitimate. Sign everything.
All right.
Dave.
Thanks for more work.
So I kept putting myself at the end of the queue because I have a completely unrelated, very quick query to the group. Nothing whatsoever to do with this working group, except this working group is the email anti-abuse working group that's operational. And most or all of you are familiar with Cory Doctorow's posting on his website that was no doubt intended as humor, but turned out to be vastly useful in listing all of the reasons that the proposal for the final ultimate solution to stopping spam that someone has won't work. It occurred to me that that history of being useful to be able to point people to it is consistent enough over a long enough period of time that I'm now worried that it will disappear from his website. And I have not approached him about this, but I'm actually interested in trying to get it published as an RFC to create an archival copy. And I'm curious whether people would find that useful.
since I'm sitting at the chair and since Bron is putting himself in the queue, I think it would be useful and I think actually exactly the kind of thing that Elliot would love to put in the independent series. It's that kind of paper that I think belongs there.
Okay. Any other feedback about that would be appreciated.
Jim got into the queue before Bron did, faster with his fingers.
Ha ha ha. I kind of think that creating an RFC for something is a very high overhead way of making something archivable when there are other archive mechanisms that already exist, like archive.org. So it isn't going to go away.
Archive.org is a relatively obscure mechanism, and I take your point that it means that there is an existence proof for the document. That's different from saying it's convenient to access.
I think it's a great idea. I would love for this to be an RFC. I think this work in this working group probably ticks at least half the boxes on that chart, if not more, unfortunately. And yeah, it's great. I think it should be an RFC, not even necessarily in April. And I think independent stream's the place for it.
All right. We have 19 minutes left. You either get 19 minutes back or you say something at the mic.
Oh yes, Andy had something.
And Andy had something to say.
Yeah, I use the, since we're in the art area, I use the IESG real-time protocol to ask the security ADs what they thought about the post-quantum question. And the response back was TLS will have post-quantum, and therefore this is kind of like DNSSEC where it's not super urgent. Now that is their opinion. So if the working group has a different opinion, we can thumb wrestle with them, but that was the response.
All right. Going once. Oh, Michael. Good. Fast on the draw.
His fingers are tired.
Yes, thank you. And I apologize for not enabling video. Right before the session started, I was working on my tractor and a hydraulic hose popped, and I'm sitting here covered with hydraulic fluid. Anyways, I don't see the post-quantum as critical in terms of, backwards compatibility and whatever you're using, but I do see it as a differentiator. So early adoption might be slower if DKIM 2 or whatever we call it starts out using post-quantum algorithms, but I see it as a driver in terms of adoption once we hit that post-quantum event horizon, because it's already baked in and that's the starting point, as opposed to a transition from earlier pre-quantum algorithms. So I think that's just a point for consideration and discussion. Sorry, Murray.
No, appreciated. Jim.
Well, I should probably get together with Andy or maybe the security ADs afterward. I'm really puzzled by their answer. I don't see what anything that TLS adopting post-quantum has anything to do with this.
I tend to agree, but I also think we're not in any hurry, right? If the Ed 209 keys aren't introduced yet, then like, what do we care about the stuff that isn't even in TLS use yet? Ed 209 was a Robocop reference that none of you got.
Yeah, I mean, my bringing it up originally was not that there was an urgency to it, but that when we're transitioning or contemplating transitioning to a new DKIM signature format, or DKIM 2 signature format specifically, that we it's an opportune time to do it. That's all.
Got it. Okay.
The queue increased again.
Go ahead, Michael.
I'm going to take a wild stab and guess that their point is that once it's baked into TLS, that there will be wider and relatively quick adoption versus point solutions.
Ron, go ahead.
I'm just going to repeat what I said on the list, I think, out loud as well, which is that there's really two choices here. There is retain compatibility with existing DKIM keys that many people have gone to the hassle of getting into the DNS, many of whom are not experts in this and have figured out how to get a key in the DNS and have no clue how to do anything else. Or choose something more secure, more modern as a base and say you have to do that in order to play. And there are certainly merits to both of those. I don't know how long we can defer making a definitive decision on that. I'm happy to design for either. And certainly we want to design for upgradability anyway, because 2025 is not the year that we have come up with perfect security and perfect protocols that never need to be changed, and algorithm dexterity needs to be designed in. But I think that is going to be a deployability consideration more than anything else. And so we may be compromising allowing a less secure, but still a lot better than plain text thing to capture all the existing users.
Go ahead, Alan.
Yeah, so I mean, I'll just, I guess, repeat what I said earlier. Like, it's just not, it's going to be such a huge barrier to adoption if DKIM2 requires deploying new keys for signing. Like, it's not about the algorithm, right? Like, even if it required deploying new keys that were still RSA keys, like, it's so difficult to convince, like, for service providers to convince their customers who control their own DNS probably to do anything. And that's very much why we're saying that we want to reuse DKIM's RSA keys, at least, is to allow adoption of DKIM2 by service providers, and deferring the question of how do we deploy quantum or post-quantum safe keys to a future date, instead of trying to bundle these two things together.
Michael, perhaps you have the last word on this topic.
Oh, wow. I agree with Bron specifically that this should be a point of discussion. I think it needs to go back to the list. It's not something that has to be done today. We've already had the discussion that even if we don't use different keys, the transition is going to be a long one. So I kind of see that as a red herring to say that new keys make it a longer transition. But I think we should have this discussion. It's an important one.
And you didn't get to be last, Michael. Wait.
Sorry, I'm the killjoy. But I think this speaks to, the point that Barry and some others made out on the list, that, making a must for combinations of algorithms is going to have some interoperability issues. And I think this is a point that Alan is making, or at least, adoption challenges. I think, it's, at certain times, the point that Richard was making about doing the must is valid. I mean, when we get to that event horizon where we think, post-quantum crypto is likely to happen, then at that point, it makes a lot of sense for this body or a successor to say, we're going to require this set of algorithms to be more resilient against post-quantum crypto. And then, or post-quantum, and then basically we need that post-quantum crypto. So what I'm proposing is basically at different timescales, we change, or the baseline is going to be a should for different algorithms. But at certain points, when we hit that event horizon, when we think that there is going to be a likelihood of some sort of breakthrough or whatever, that at that point, yes, then it makes sense to require that, post-quantum crypto be part of this signature, that part of this specification. I don't think we're there yet. So I would agree with the folks here that basically we don't want to create barriers to entry. We'll start off with the existing legacy base, work up from there, create incentives for folks to adopt the new algorithms. And then when we see that event horizon, we know it's here, then at that point, we start doing those musts. That's my point.
Thanks. Whoop, no, Mike wants to be. Go ahead, Mike.
I'm not trying to be last, but I just wanted to respond to Wei. I think that we could, if we design it so that there's already post-quantum algorithms out there from NIST. So if we design it to start out with a should, then it becomes very easy to change it to a must and drop RSA when we hit that event horizon, versus doing some hand waving and say, well, we'll deal with that later down the road. And when that event horizon hits, there's going to be a mad scramble in a whole bunch of different areas. And I'm going to say DKIM 2, or whatever we call it, is not going to be the highest priority for most people. Just saying.
Thanks. I think even though this is currently out of charter, we will summarize this discussion and let Andy bring it to the IASG and see what they want to do with it. With that, I think we are done. So Murray and I will try and get all this summarized right quick after this meeting. If we do move to adoption relatively quickly, we'll talk on the list about an interim if we start actually able to turn the crank on some protocol work, because I think having one before November would probably be useful, assuming we get a document or one or more documents adopted. And then we will hopefully see more of you either present or remotely in Montreal in November.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks. Have a good evening. Have a good morning. Have a good whatever it is where you are. It's still Tuesday for everybody, I think. Bye, all.
Sure. One's best.
I think there are some things that there was convergence on, but it seems to me that his really willing to defend his stuff is not that interesting. Okay. I mean, yeah. Okay, that's my reason. So we should have a chat next week at some point, or we can sit down here together, but sort of go through the notes. Thank you, Mauro. Not a problem. There, as far as I can tell, people seem to